Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham, Racha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Jeremiah, the 25th chapter, as it reads prophecy of the captivity. So this is Jeremiah chapter 25, verse 1. The word that came to Jeremiah concerning all the people of Judah in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah. Now, Jehoiakim, right? When you look at the family line, you had Josiah, right? Let me see if I actually can even find it here in the timelines. Let's see if we can. Okay, there you go. So you had here Josiah. Now they don't show. It looks like they didn't put here Jehoahaz, which was the one who was placed by Israel on the throne after Josiah died. He reigned for a couple of months before he was taken captive to Egypt, and then Jehoiakim was set up. In any case, when we read here in verse 1, the 4th year of Jehoiakim, when we look up Jehoiakim, it says here that he started reigning in 609, right, at the death of, or at the ending of the reign of Josiah, right? And so in the 4th year would be 605, right? That's 609 minus 4, 605 BC. As it says, that was the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, right? Which lines up when you look up the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. He started reigning in 605 BC. So Jeremiah is saying during this time, and also something interesting to note is as we go through the various chapters, you'll see that, like I mentioned before, the events in these chapters are not necessarily in chronological order, right? Some chapters you'll read and it'll say, oh, the word that came to Jeremiah during this king's reign. And then the next chapter would be like during the time of Zedekiah, which was like the last king or ruler of Judah before it was destroyed. And then maybe the chapter after that, it would say, oh, during the time of Jehoiakim, right? So it you know, it's not strictly in chronological order, just to keep that in mind. Anyway, so the word came unto Jeremiah, right? The which Jeremiah the prophet spake unto all the people of Judah and to all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, saying, from the 13th year of Josiah the son of Ammon, king of Judah, even unto this day, that is the 23rd year. So from the 13th year of Josiah, when we look up Josiah, that this is around 628 BC, right? So we know that around 628/627 is when the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah, right? If we go here to Jeremiah, the 1st chapter, he tells you that, right? To whom the word of the Lord came in the days of Josiah, the son of Ammon, king of Judah, in the 13th year of his reign. So in the 13th year of Josiah's reign is when the Lord had Jeremiah start to prophesy to Judah. And he says that from that time till this day, which we're reading of, has been 23 years. And the word of the Lord Yahweh hath come unto me, and I have spoken unto you, rising early and speaking, but ye have not hearkened. So for 23 years, Jeremiah is saying, I've been rising up, I've been constantly, you know, prophesying and speaking the words of the Lord unto you, and you haven't listened. And the Lord Yahweh hath sent unto you all his servants, the prophets, rising early and sending them, but ye have not hearkened, nor inclined your ear to hear. So the Lord sent the different prophets. Jeremiah wasn't the first, and he sure wasn't the last. But just like they didn't listen to Jeremiah, they didn't listen or take heed to the prophets the Lord sent before him or after. They said, turn, the prophets that is, turn ye again now every one from his evil way. So stop doing the the wicked things that you're accustomed to doing, turn from that and from the evil of your doings, and dwell in the land that the Lord Yahweh hath given unto you and to your fathers forever and ever. And what this means is, by turning from your evil ways, you would be allowed to continue to dwell in the land. All right. And go not after other gods to serve them and to worship them and provoke me not to anger with the works of your hands. The works of their hands were idols, right? Because they would physically like cut down the tree, the wood, carve it, and so on and so forth. So don't provoke the Lord to anger by worshiping the works of your hands, being these idols, and I will do you no hurt. So the prophets were prophesying to Israel, telling them, the Lord says, as long as you listen to him, you'll be fine. Okay, as long as you don't provoke him in doing this wickedness, then he's not going to do any harm to you. Yet ye have not hearkened unto me, saith the Lord Yahweh, that ye might provoke me to anger with the works of your hands to your own hurt. So, till this day, you didn't listen to the Lord, right? And instead, you decided you wanted to provoke him by worshiping idols to your own demise, because what's going to happen once you provoke the living God, the one true living God, the God of the universe? He's going to hurt you. He's going to bring judgment against you. So by doing that, they did it to their own hurt. Therefore, thus saith the Lord Yahweh of hosts, because ye have not heard my words, behold, I will send and take all the families of the north, saith the Lord Yahweh, and Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. And the families of the north here would be the armies that the Lord would bring along with Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, my servant. Here he is referred to as the Lord's servant because the Lord set him up to do his will, right, to play a certain role. So really, in essence, by Nebuchadnezzar doing the things he did, he was serving the Lord, right, fulfilling his purpose. And I will bring them against this land and against the inhabitants thereof and against all these nations round about. So it wasn't just, Judah that suffered at the hands of the Babylonians, but the neighboring nations as well. When the Babylonians made their campaign into the Levant area, they didn't just isolate Judah, right? If we look here at the Neo-Babylonian Empire, okay, let me see. Yeah, we can take this. So just zooming in a little bit, you can see here that Jerusalem, Jericho, Lachish, and even all of these regions here, Petra, right, even going all the way down here, they were all subject, right? They were all colonized, you could say, taken over. All right, so it wasn't just Judah. And that's why the Lord said, or is saying here, that he would also bring judgment, or the Babylonians against all these nations round about, Moab, Ammon, Edom, and will utterly destroy them and make them an astonishment and an hissing and perpetual desolations. Okay, and what this means is that he would, similar to what he did to Jerusalem, in order for them to be taken down, obviously, and usually nations put up a fight or try to resist, and then that warrants the armies of the invader, which might have the upper hand, to, whether it's destroying their cities, lighting it on fire, slaying their men, and so on and so forth. That's pretty much what's meant by the making them an hissing and the perpetual desolations, because it's not that the Lord made those regions eternally desolate, because after the Babylonian rule, when you even go in there during the time of the Persians and even the time of the Greeks, those neighboring nations were still there, right? Like people were still dwelling in those lands. When we were trying to rebuild the walls during the time of Nehemiah, who do you think it was that we had to defend ourselves against when we had a tool for building in one hand and your sword in the other? Right? There was mention of I think it was an Ammonite or a Moabite in there as well that was causing trouble. So that perpetual desolations doesn't mean that the land of Edom and Moab and Ammon was just completely destroyed, but rather they faced devastation at the hand of the Babylonians. Moreover, I will take from them the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness. Mirth is like joy and, singing and so on. And how will the Lord take this away? Well, if you're at a party and somebody pulls up and starts shooting up, and you hear bullets flying, what are you doing? You're taking away the joy and the mirth and the gladness, and you're replacing it with sorrow and fear and screams of terror. So the Lord, by bringing this judgment, was in essence taking away from them that joy, that joy, as it says, the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride. So nobody is going to be having weddings, right? Clearly during, during this time, because, when we were, let's say, autonomous, or we were free prior to being made subject or captives under their reign, we were able to do all these things. But post that time, that wasn't happening in Jerusalem. So as it says, the voice of the bride, the sound of the millstones, and which is like working, because when you actually are grinding the the grain between the two millstones to make the flour, you're gonna hear the sound of it, right? And typically that's what you hear in in a normal society. Everything is all good, right? It's part of the day of life, or life in a day, or a way of life. It says here, and the light of the candle, right? Which is because in the ancient world, they didn't have like light switches that you would go and flick it, right? They would have candles. But what this is signifying is all that is going to cease. Your sense of normalcy, right, and life and all that is going to be done away with. And this whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. So the land, right, starting with that of Jerusalem or that of Judah, for their disobedience, would be unrecognizable, right? It would be destroyed. It would be made desolate. But we wouldn't be the only ones that would suffer at the hand of the king of Babylon for this duration of time. Verse 12, and it shall come to pass when 70 years are accomplished that I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation. So it's not like the Nebuchadnezzar or like the Babylonians were going to reign forever. Or let me just say the Neo-Babylonian Empire was going to reign forever, because at an appointed time, the Lord had them being taken over by the Persians. Right? Saith the Lord, for their iniquity and the land of the Chaldeans, and I will make it perpetual desolations. Once again, not necessarily meaning that the land is going to be completely and utterly emptied. All right. But that empire, right, of the Neo-Babylonians would be brought down, would be taken over. It would be broken up. Verse 13, and I will bring upon the land all my words which I have pronounced against it, i.e. the judgments, even all that is written in this book, which Jeremiah hath prophesied against all the nations. So the Lord would bring to pass the word, he would make good on the word that he had Jeremiah prophesied, both against Israel and against Judah and against Babylon, and against the neighboring nations. For many nations and great kings shall serve themselves of them also, and I will recompense them according to their deeds and according to the works of their own hands. And when you look this up in the NLT, right, it says here, many nations and great kings will enslave the Babylonians just as they enslaved my people. I will punish them in proportion to the suffering they cause my people. All right, as the Lord said that eventually he would return that judgment upon them. So what ended up happening to them? Well, they ended up being conquered by the Achaemenid Empire, right? And then that land eventually got taken over after that time by the the Greeks. So as it says here, for thus saith the Lord your house, and it's similar to what the Lord is going to do to Esau, right? The scriptures describe Esau as the hand or the sword of the Lord, and yet the Lord says that after using him to punish us, he is then going to be punished for touching the apple of the Lord's eye. For thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, unto me, take the wine, right? This is what the Lord said to Jeremiah. Take the wine cup of this fury at my hand. So now this is symbolic, right? The Lord commanded Jeremiah to take this cup, this symbolic cup of filled with fury of the Lord, from the Lord, and cause all the nations to whom I send thee to drink it. So being that it's symbolic, the Lord didn't actually physically send Jeremiah to like all these nations, because as we're about to read, he pretty much describes all the nations on the face of the planet Earth, right? So Jeremiah didn't, by taking the cup, right, and causing them to drink it, it wasn't by him literally going there. First off, what cup is big enough for you to carry and travel all around the planet, making nations drink it? And what's in it? You know, the fury of the Lord. What kind of liquid is that? Right? So it's symbolic. And by the way Jeremiah would cause them to drink it, because the number one, the cup represents the fury of the Lord, represents the judgment of the Lord. Drinking of that cup, meaning you are going to suffer or endure in that judgment, right? So by Jeremiah causing them to drink it, meaning he was pronouncing or prophesying of this judgment that will come against them. It says here, and they shall drink it and be moved and be mad. So it's comparing the their partaking of this judgment to be like somebody actually drinking and being drunk and becoming like crazed, right? Or overly drunk or consumed, as it says, because of the sword that I will send among them, right? So that fury of the Lord, which comes in many ways, you know, the sword, famine, pestilence, collectively known as judgment. The Lord is saying, I'm going to make these nations drunk. They're going to drink it, and it's going to have an effect on them like somebody who is over consumed with strong drink. And they're going to have this reaction because of the sword or the judgment that I'm going to bring among them. Then I took the cup at the Lord Yahweh's hand and made all the nations to drink, unto whom the Lord Yahweh had sent me. So all the nations that the Lord had commanded Jeremiah to prophesy against, which would be the symbolic drinking of this cup, he did. It says, to wit, Jerusalem and the cities of Judah and the kings thereof. So now he starts to list the nations which would be subject to drinking of this cup, right? Representing the wrath of the Lord, and the kings thereof and the princes thereof, to make them a desolation, an astonishment, and hissing, and a curse, as it is this day. So Jerusalem and Judah and the kings thereof and the princes thereof, drinking of that cup, i.e. pronouncing judgment against them, would make them, or the effect of that would be them being a desolation, right? You know, the after effects of having been destroyed by the Neo-Babylonian empire or army, leaving them or in a state of being a cause of hissing, right, or curse, or people would look at it and be like, damn, like, you know, this is what happened to this nation. Then it moves on to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and his servants and his princes and all his people and all the mingled people, i.e. the mixed, all the people that were mixed in around that region, and all the kings of the land of Uz, and all the kings of the land of the Philistines. See, and this is why I mentioned that it's symbolic, because Jeremiah was not going to travel all the way over here to where Uz used to be. All right. Or actually, let me just pull it up. Where are we at? Yeah, the land of Uz. I believe this is in Mesopotamia. Oh, okay. So I looks like I confused that with right? That's why I just double check. It says here, a country of Job, probably east and southeast of Palestine, somewhere in the Arabian desert. So actually somewhere down, somewhere probably down here. Okay, but in any case, even as it mentions Uz and other nations that it's going to mention, he wasn't going to travel all the way there with some cup, metaphorical cup, right, to tell him, hey, you got to drink this. So continuing as it says here, and all the kings of the land of Uz, and all the kings of the land of the Philistines, and Ashkelon, and Azah, and Ekron, and the remnant of Ashdod, Edom, and Moab, and the children of Ammon, and all the kings of Tyrus, and all the kings of Zidon, and all the kings of the isles which are beyond the sea. So that's the islands, right, that are beyond that, basically their coastal area here. Okay. Dedan and Tema and Buz, and all that are in the utmost corners, and all the kings of Arabia, and all the kings of the mingled people that dwell in the desert, right? Which is probably in somewhere in these regions over here. And it's kind of interesting that it refers to them as mingled, right? Because when you go into the word mingle, to mingle something, like intermingle, for example, means like you mix it together. So it's interesting that it's called Arabia, because Arab means, I believe it means mix. Let me see. Does it? Okay, they don't give you the actual. Okay, yeah, it just says evening. But technically speaking, if you look at it, the evening is basically like the merging of the day and the night, right? Transition in between. I forgot where I saw that. In that sense of mixture, but in any case, it's all right. So the reason I'm saying it's interesting that they mentioned mingled, or it's referred to as mingled here. Yeah, so mixture. Yeah, there you go. It's the same word, Irab, right? Mingled. So yeah, it's interesting that the region is called Arabia, right? Because meaning look, see, Arabia mingled. Because you have a mixture of different like people in that region. Which is why when you call somebody Arab, that's not really like a nationality necessarily, right? It's like it's a mix of different people that are in there. But I say that because they mentioned within this region, right? As I showed, you had I believe was it Uz? So Uz, where Job was, and we know that obviously where we believe Job would have obviously come back as an Israelite in his time, right? Even though when we get to the book of Job, we'll get deeper into it, but it doesn't really give too much about the timeline that Job was in. But we know that it had to be, somewhere in the past, the extra past. So in any case, it's like somewhere within this region down here, otherwise known as, where you had a lot of mingled people. So just something to point out. Anyway, as it says here in verse 24, and all the kings of Arabia, and all the kings of the mingled people that dwell in the desert, and all the kings of Zimri, and all the kings of Elam, and all the kings of the Medes. So even going as far east, okay? And all the kings of the north, far and near, one with another, and all the kingdoms of the world which are upon the face of the earth, and the king of Shishak shall drink after them. And the king of Shishak is another name for Babylon, right? So technically it's like saying the king of Babylon shall drink this cup of the Lord's fury after them. So when you look at all the nations that were mentioned here, it's pretty much damn near everybody that the Lord said would drink of his wrath. Okay, now what's interesting about this is that the fulfillment and fullness of this would have to be, during this time when the Lord actually gathers and brings judgment upon all these nations. Because some of the nations mentioned in here, yeah, they did suffer, different calamities, like being suffering, captivity or plagues that the Lord sent upon them, but not all collectively, and especially not all at the same time. Because at the time of the reign of the Medes, for example, the Babylonians were also reigning at the same time, right? And so the Medes weren't suffering necessarily like the wrath of the Lord at that same time, when they were ruling like side by side with the with the Babylonians per se. Okay, so when you look at all these nations here, at the point where some were maybe in turmoil, others weren't. But we know that the point in time when all these nations here are going to suffer the wrath of the Lord is going to be in this time now, as he even mentions, as we'll read on down, and in other precepts like in the book of Zephaniah, right, and Isaiah, where the Lord talks about pleading with all flesh. All right, so the Lord had Jeremiah symbolically pronounce judgment against the nations of the world, right, that they would suffer the wrath or drink of the wrath via this cup of the Lord. And as I mentioned, that the king of Shishak shall drink after them. Now, in in the ancient time, yes, the Neo-Babylonian Empire did go down in the form of being like taken over by the Persians, but prophetically speaking, that king of Babylon also drinking of this cup would represent Babylon itself, right, which we know is America today, drinking of the wrath of the Lord, right? So in this order, you could say, or this charge that the Lord gave Jeremiah, it goes past, at least for these verses here, it goes past just the nations at that time, and even up until the nations of the world in this time, prophetically speaking, suffering the wrath or drinking of the wrath of the Lord. Verse 27, therefore thou shalt say unto them, thus saith the Lord Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel, drink ye and be drunken, and spew and fall. So drink so much, you're gonna be filled so much with this wrath, right, that you're gonna basically, it's like somebody that's over drunk, if that's even a term, to where they throw up and then they just like pass out and just don't come up don't get up anymore. And that's what the Lord is likening what it's gonna be like when he pours this drink of his wrath down the throat of these nations, where they will not come back up into a position of power or anything of that sort anymore. As it says, because of the sword which I will send among you, i.e. the judgment that the Lord would bring upon them. And it shall be, if they refuse to take the cup at thine hand to drink, then shalt thou say unto them, thus saith the Lord Yahweh of hosts, ye shall certainly drink. Now, once again, this is symbolic, right? So considering that Jeremiah didn't actually go to all these nations that we just read with a cup to where they even had a chance to say, nah, we don't want to drink that. But this is, the Lord is phrasing it this way, but it's just symbolizing that the judgment of the Lord is inevitable and unavoidable. So even if you tried to refuse it, you wouldn't have the chance to. You're certainly going to drink of it. No nation was going to be able to refuse the judgment of the Lord when it was time to commence or bring it upon them. That's why he says, ye shall certainly drink. For lo, I begin to bring evil on the city which is called by my name, and should ye be utterly unpunished? So the Lord is saying, well, I'm going to judge even my people, right? The city that is called by my name, Israel, Jerusalem. And do you think I'm going to let you heathens go unpunished with all the wickedness you do and that you've done to them? Ye shall not be unpunished, for I will call for a sword upon all the inhabitants of the earth, saith the Lord of hosts. Therefore prophesy thou against them all these words, and say unto them, the Lord Yahweh shall roar from on high, and utter his voice from his holy habitation. He shall mightily roar upon his habitation. He shall give a shout as they that tread the grapes. Now, this is symbolizing the wrath of the Lord, right? The beginning of the Lord's wrath. Because when you roar, you're it's like similar to like a war cry, but it triggers an adrenaline rush. And adrenaline kicks in when you're about to, do something that's going to cause like it's going to take a lot of energy. It's going to require whether it's extra strength or whatever the case is. So that adrenaline also kicks in as a chemical reaction to support that. So as it says here, he shall give a shout as they that tread the grapes. Now, when you go into the ancient world, treading the grapes was an event that was typically a joyful one, right? Where when you're stomping on the grapes, they would either be singing or, rejoicing or whatnot. But here is not saying that he's going to give like a rejoicing shout, but the point is, just like those that are treading the grapes are loud, though they're doing it to rejoice, it's saying that the Lord is going to let out a shout that is also going to be loud, except this shout isn't going to be for the rejoicing of the nations, because it's going to be against the inhabitants of the earth. As it says, a noise shall come even to the ends of the earth. For the Lord Yahweh hath a controversy with the nations. He will plead with all flesh. He will give them that are wicked to the sword, saith the Lord. See? So this goes to show you that it's prophetic, because when you what's that precept? I think if we cross-reference it, it should come up. There's one in Isaiah, right? Yeah, this is good, but the one I'm looking for is, there it is, Isaiah 66. And then also, let me see if, okay, let's hold that. Right, Isaiah 66 and 16, for by fire and by his sword will the Lord Yahweh plead with all flesh. By his what? By his sword. And what did we just read here? Let's read that again. A noise shall come even to the ends of the earth, for the Lord Yahweh hath a controversy with the nations. He will plead with all flesh. Doesn't mean he's going to beg, but he's going to judge. All flesh, he will give them that are wicked to the sword, saith the Lord, right? As we're reading of in Isaiah 66. As it says, for by his sword will the Lord plead with all flesh, and the slain of the Lord Yahweh shall be many. So continuing here, as it says, verse 32, thus saith the Lord Yahweh of hosts, behold, evil shall go forth from nation to nation, and a great whirlwind shall be raised up from the coasts of the earth. Meaning the Lord is going to send evil upon the earth, right, via his judgments from nation to nation, from one end to the other. And as it mentions, the whirlwind, which is how the Lord likens his judgment onto being. Okay, but also you can look at it as in the form of the chariots, because they also, as the scriptures mention, right, they cloak themselves, right, in the whirlwind, you know, but holistically, it's just a representation of the Lord's judgment. As it mentions, a great whirlwind being raised up from the coasts of the earth. And the slain of the Lord shall be at that day from one end of the earth even onto the other of the earth. And once again, that at that day is the prophetic part, right? That's letting you know that this is going to be a time in the future. And as we just read in Isaiah 66, right, the slain of the Lord shall be many. They shall not be lamented, neither gathered nor buried. They shall be as dung upon the earth, right? Meaning that they're you know, there's going to be so many dead bodies. I forget what other chapter it's in, but it mentions how their bodies are going to be as dung upon the earth. Because remember, the Lord did promise the birds and the fowls a feast. What are they going to feast on? The dead bodies. But obviously in due time, you know, they will be cleaned up, because you're not going to leave dead bodies just in the open like that for, you know, to just rot and breed, you know, infections and diseases and stuff. But this is symbolizing how great of a destruction the Lord is going to bring. Howl ye shepherds and cry and wallow yourselves in the ashes. And now this is dealing with the judgment of Israel. The shepherds being the leaders or the overseers. As it says, wallow yourselves in ashes, which is a sign of mourning or lamenting. Ye principal of the flock. So the flock are the people, or Israel. The principal would be the leaders, right? The princes, the elders, the rulers. For the days of your slaughter and your dispersion are accomplished, meaning it's at hand. Okay, if let's say the Lord said, I'm going to bring judgment upon you in 10 days, well, 10 days later, that the days of that judgment are now accomplished, meaning the 10 days have expired and now the judgment is going to commence. It says, and ye shall fall like a pleasant vessel, right? So like how you have a, you know, a fragile vase or something like that falls and breaks. That's how, you know, they're going to be likened onto in the day of the Lord's judgment. And the shepherds shall have no way to flee, nor the principal of the flock to escape. So you're not going to be able to escape this judgment the Lord is going to bring. A voice of the cry of the shepherds and an howling of the principal of the flock shall be heard, for the Lord Yahweh hath spoiled their pasture. So this is like comparing the judgment coming upon the people to like them being animals, right? Or a flock. And what happens if you take away the pasture or the food of a flock? They suffer, right? Or they starve, or they cry out. So here the Lord is likening his judgment he would bring upon Israel and their leaders, the false leaders, of course, to like flock or sheep without food. And the peaceable habitations are cut down because of the fierce anger of the Lord. So the dwelling places of Israel, in the past it was Jerusalem, right? Now it would be wherever Israel is dwelling. But this would be through what? The anger of the Lord Yahweh. He hath forsaken his covert as a lion, i.e. the Lord has come out of his covering or his hiding place like a lion. For their land is desolate because of the fierceness of the oppressor and because of his fierce anger. So by the judgment of the Lord, he would make their land desolate, which he did, due to the fierceness of the oppressor, right? So he put a fierce spirit upon Nebuchadnezzar and his armies to do the damage that they did, right, to Israel at that time, because of the wrath of the Lord that he had kindled against them. And similarly, he's going to put that same kind of fierce spirit upon Esau, Edom, to basically do worse than he did back then, except, you know, this wouldn't be in this time directly to the land, but really to the people, okay, and wherever they may be dwelling, once again, because of the wrath or the fierce anger of the Lord. And that brings us to the end of Jeremiah, the 25th chapter. Lord willing, this is edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Racha Kudash. And until next time, Shalom.